welcome back to my channel. Today it is time to talk about winter book releases. So I've sifted through the internet and I've found the titles and the descriptions of all the books that sound the most interesting to me coming out in December, January, and February. Without any further ado, let's jump right into the books that are coming out in December. I am filming this in December, so some of these books have already been released, but first up we have a kind of mystical fantasy called The Peculiar Garden of Harriet Hunt. And this is the story of a woman whose father went missing several years ago, and she's left to care for their kind of crumbling Gothic estate. On that estate, there are these sprawling gardens that she also has to take care of. There's a little bit of scrutiny surrounding her father's experience, and she herself is a bit of an outcast, but eventually she meets a man who's able to kind of look past the peculiarities that everybody else sees, and she ends up marrying him. However, she quickly finds out that her new husband is not who he portrayed himself to be, and things are getting dark pretty quickly. So she has to turn to those sprawling magical gardens on that estate to help herself find freedom. Next on my list is a book called I Might Be in Trouble by Daniel Ailman. And this one sounds pretty funny. This is about a man who is a struggling writer. His name's David. He wakes up one morning after a fun date with a charming, dazzling stranger. Unfortunately, he wakes up to find that fun, dazzling stranger dead in his bed, and he's got some pretty fuzzy memories from the night before, so he calls the only person he feels like he can trust, who is his literary agent, and they have to kind of piece together what happened the night before. Not only that, but they also have to figure out what to do with the body and how they can turn this story into David's next great novel. Up next is a book called Definitely Better Now by Ava Robinson, and this one I was actually able to choose as one of the options for my book of the month this month. Did you have to pick out the noisiest toy? This book is about a woman named Emma who has 1 year of sobriety under her belt. She's 26 years old, and she has decided after conquering sobriety for a year, she's going to get back in the dating scene. But she doesn't realize just how complicated it's become, and she decides to open up to the IT guy from her office, who just happens to be kind of charming, and she realizes that she may need to realign the expectations that she has for what her life should look like, especially now in sobriety. Up next is a book called What the Woods Took by Courtney Gould. And this one sounds intense. This one is the story of 5 teenagers who get kind of put into this extreme wilderness therapy program. They're taken from their homes by surprise and find out that part of the program is enduring a 50-day hike through the wilderness, with the goal being coming out on the other side better versions of themselves. However, when both of their counselors go missing, the group of teens quickly realizes that they've got a problem on their hands, and they're left on their own to fend for themselves and try to stay away from the monsters lurking in the woods. Last up for December is a book called Not in My Book by Katie Holt. This is the story of our female main character, Rosie, who leaves her home in Tennessee to pursue her dream of making it as a romance writer in New York. So she's attending classes, and then eventually she ends up in the class with her rival, who she also happens to have had a little bit of a crush on previously. However, they butt heads quite a lot. This male main character named Aiden is not very subtle about expressing his distaste for the romance genre that Rosie writes in, and at a certain point their arguments and bickering in class get to be so much that their professor threatens to drop them from the class unless they can work together on a project that blends their two genres. So they have to figure out how to put their differences aside and co-write a novel that's going to blend their two crafts together. Moving on to January, we have Alice Feeney coming out with another book called Beautiful Ugly, and this is another one that I was able to pick up early in my Book of the Month box. And this is a story of a man who is talking on the phone with his wife, and as they're having this conversation, he can hear her brakes slam, and he can hear her get out of her car, and then the line goes dead silent. So eventually he's able to track her car down to a cliffside, and he finds it still running with the door open, her phone laying on the ground, and she's nowhere to be found. And so after a year of her missing, Grady decides to go on a trip to try to recenter and try to get back to who he was and get his life back on track. And he travels to a remote Scottish island for this rejuvenating experience where he happens to spot a woman who looks like a dead ringer for his missing wife. Next up, we have a YA mystery thriller fantasy called Mystery Royale by Caitlin Cavalancia. This one was giving me, the synopsis for this one was giving me Inheritance Games vibes, and this is about a 16-year-old named Mullery Prudence. She's left to take care of her sick grandmother in the wake of her mother's death, and she starts receiving these strange letters that are appearing in odd places. They're not coming through the mail. She's finding them in places like the refrigerator and a sealed bag of dog food. In her mind, she knows that she should probably avoid these letters and ignore them, but her curiosity gets the better of her, and she receives an invitation to compete in the Mystery Royale. This is a game that is being hosted at the Stoutmeyer estate. The prize for winning the competition is a pretty sizable inheritance left by Xavier Stoutmeyer. When our main character enters the game, she realizes that the prize is not only the inheritance, but also receiving some of Mr. Stoutmeyer's magic. So the winner of Mystery Royale must solve Xavier Stoutmeyer's murder, and there's a fair amount of family drama that gets untangled along the way. Next up is a book called The Perfect Home by Daniel Kennetz. This one is a domestic thriller that's described as Gone Girl meets Fixer Upper. Our main characters, Dawn and Wyatt Decker, are husband and wife, and they host their own reality home renovation show. And Dawn is really kind of put out by all of the things that come along with the notoriety from their TV show. She doesn't appreciate the inconveniences and the impositions on her life, whereas Wyatt craves more fame. Off-screen, the couple is also struggling with fertility because of Wyatt's low sperm count, and so after enduring a rather experimental fertility treatment, the couple is able to conceive. But Wyatt's personality turns kind of dark and cruel after the conception. And Dawn actually discovers that Wyatt has a plot to use tragedy to help skyrocket them to fame. Feeling like she's facing danger, Dawn actually escapes with her infant twins, and Wyatt goes all in on this smear campaign to paint her as the antagonist, the villain, even to people that they know, hoping to turn not only the public eye against her, but also their loved ones and people that they know. Next up is A Sea of Unspoken Things by Adrienne Young. And this is a story about a twin brother and sister named James and Johnny Golden. And their connection goes a little bit beyond the traditional twin bond. James can actually feel the things that Johnny feels. So when Johnny's in an accident, James can feel that pain herself, and she knows before she even receives the call that her brother's gone. So James is left to settle her brother's affairs in the wake of his death, and she has to travel to the small town of Hawthorne, California. While she's there, she's confronted with some of the darkness of her past, but she also realizes that their connection is not quite severed. So she has to kind of throw herself into Johnny's world, and she discovers that there are some secrets that she was not aware of. So then she's faced with the task of deciding what needs to stay hidden and what should stay hidden and what needs to come to light. Brady Hendricks has a new book coming out in January called Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, and the story takes place in the summer of 1970, and it follows 15-year-old Fern, who arrives at the Wellwood home, which is a home for wayward girls in St. Augustine, Florida. Fern is pregnant, she's scared, and she's alone, but when she arrives, she is quickly surrounded by people who are in her same position. Under the care of Miss Wellwood, who runs Wellwood Home, she meets a dozen other girls who are just like her. Girls have to live under pretty strict control, with the staff keeping an eye on everything that they eat, how they spend all of their time, even the things that they could talk about. But when Fern meets a librarian who shares a book about the occult with Fern, Fern and the girls decide to take things into their own hands, to find power for the first time in their lives, but they quickly find out that power can be dangerous. Next up is No Place Left to Hide by Megan Lally. This is a YA thriller, and the synopsis reads, "To Brooke, image is everything. She works hard to maintain perfect grades, perfect looks, a perfect life, especially after the incident that threatened it all. Getting into her dream university puts her that much closer to a fresh start. How can she say no to celebrating with all her classmates? Hanging out with her crush by the bonfire is the perfect end to the night. Except it isn't the end. An old truck starts aggressively tailing Brooke and her best friend on the isolated road toward home. Someone thinks they know the truth about the incident, and they won't stop until it's all out in the open. This terrifying drive is about to bring out Brooke's worst fears if she survives it." I just recently read That's Not My Name by Megan Lally, and that was a really good thriller. That one kept me hooked, and it was really gripping, so I'm looking forward to this next one. Next up we have A Language of Dragons by S.F. Williamson, and this story takes place in London in the 1920s, except in this version of London, dragons fly freely through the skies. There are also protests erupting on the streets of the city. Our main character, Vivian Featherswallow, is pursuing an internship to study dragon languages. However, the protests eventually turn to civil war. Her sister is arrested, her parents go missing, and Vivian is left all on her own. She's presented with a pretty mysterious job offer, and she kind of has no other choice but to take it. The job that she accepts is as a code breaker to help the war efforts, and if she's successful, then her family can return home and they can continue living together in comfort and surrounded by one another. But if she fails, then her family will be killed. So this is a high-stakes YA fantasy with kind of a dark academia twist. And there was also mention of a slow burn enemies to lovers romance. Next up is The Lamb by Lucy Rose. And this one's got some creepy horror vibes. The synopsis reads, Margot and Mama have lived by the forest since Margot can remember. When Margot is not at school, they spend quiet days together in their cottage, waiting for strangers to knock on their door. Strays, Mama calls them. Mama loves the strays. She feeds them wine, keeps them warm, then she satisfies her burning appetite by picking apart their bodies. But Mama's want is stronger than her hunger sometimes, and when a white-toothed stray turns up in the heart of a snowstorm, little Margot must confront the shifting dynamics of her family, untangle her own desires, and make her own bid for freedom. With this gothic coming-of-age tale, debut novelist Lucy Rose explores how women swallow their anger, desire, and animal instincts, and rings the relationship between mother and daughter until blood drips from it. Okay, and moving into February with probably the longest list for the shortest month. First up is Voice Like a Hyacinth by Mallory Pearson, and this one is the story of a group of art students who are so entwined in their art that they turn to the occult to maintain creative inspiration. They also kind of want to curse their kind of creepy professor. So they kind of naively embark on a ritual, and after completing that ritual, our main character notices some things start to change. She notices kind of a dark tone to all of their paintings lately. As things start to fall apart, the 5 desperate friends have to kind of figure out how to undo the wrong that they've committed, and if there is even a chance to go back. Next up is Allie Hazelwood coming out with Deep End, which is a college sports romance. This one follows a competitive diver and a champion swim captain attending Stanford. And to the naked eye, the two have absolutely nothing in common, but they actually share some kind of a secret. And once that secret is threatened, two have to come to an agreement to figure out how to keep their secret hidden. As they're trying to keep that secret hidden, pressure for the Olympics starts building up, and so does the chemistry. B.K. Borison also has a book coming out in February, and this one is called First Time Caller, and it's inspired by Sleepless in Seattle. This one follows Aiden, who is the host of Baltimore's Romance Hotline, and he gets a call from a young girl who is looking for dating advice for her mom. The call goes viral, and it kind of upends the young girl's mom's life. And Lucy, who the call was about, has to kind of reconsider if she is actually as happy as she has convinced herself that she is. Next up, we have a book called A Girl Like Us by Anna Sophia McLaughlin. The synopsis for this one reads, it's 2004 and former reality TV star and party girl Maya Miller has just married the most eligible bachelor on the planet, Colin Sterling of the globally famous Sterling family, whose history of aristocratic titles and land holdings rival a British royal, and whose media empire is comparable to the Murdochs. To some, Maya represents the American dream, to others a gold digger. But when Colin's cousin Ariana, the heiress to the family's immense fortune, is found murdered, Maya is thrust into the spotlight. First as she's revealed to be the next heiress to the fortune, and then as the prime suspect. Swiftly, the entire Sterling family goes into lockdown at Silver House, the family's ancestral estate in the English countryside. They're told it's for their own safety, but Maya becomes convinced that it's not to keep threats out, but to keep secrets in. Now she has no choice but to find and expose the truth hidden within the Sterling family, and why Ariana, a girl she had never met, chose her to take her place. But Maya has secrets of her own, and she knows that in order to survive the Sterlings, she'll have to beat them at their own game. Next up, Jojo Moyes has a new literary fiction coming out called We All Live Here. And this is a story of the main character who is really struggling in the aftermath of her destroyed marriage. She's struggling with her 2 kind of wayward daughters, and her stepfather has quietly kind of moved in. She's struggling with her career, she's got a complicated love life, and then on top of all of that, she reaches what she thinks is her final straw when her estranged father of 35 years shows up on her doorstep. So she's left to figure out how to balance it all and how to rekindle any family connections that she wants to rekindle. Next up in February, we have a Beauty and the Beast reimagining coming out called Blackwood's Blue Sky, and this is by Eowyn Ivey. This is the story of a single mother named Birdie living in rural Alaska, and she has a small daughter named Emmeline. As a single mother, Birdie struggles sometimes to provide for her daughter, so she has to wait tables at a roadside lodge in Alaska. But one day Emmeline gets lost in the woods, and a recluse named Arthur Nielsen finds her and brings her to safety. Birdie has to go to his cabin off the grid, and she quickly kind of falls in love with the life that he has. She's very much enamored by everything that he represents and the way he lives his life, and then she also falls in love with him. Against everybody in her life's wishes and advice, she moves in with him in this remote and isolated cabin that is hundreds of miles from any road or any signs of civilization. And Birdie thinks that she's prepared for the experience, but she quickly finds out that she isn't. Next up is A Killing Cold by Kate Alice Marshall. This one is about our main character named Theodora, who is 6 months into her new relationship with the wealthy and powerful Connor Scott. Theo is brought to Connor's family winter retreat with the goal of winning over some of the skeptical relatives. Theo starts receiving some threatening messages warning her to stay away from Connor, which she ignores. But once they get to the property, Theo can't really ignore the familiarity of the place. And then while staying there in an empty cabin on the property, Theo actually discovers a photo of herself as a child on the property. So she has to kind of piece together her fragmented childhood memories and figure out why she found this photo and what her connection to all of this is. If you like The Family Game by Catherine Steadman, I feel like this would be a good one for you. It sounds very similar. It sounds pretty similar with the whole kind of wealthy family estate and being stuck and trying to solve a mystery. Next up is Famous Last Words by Gillian McAllister. And this one is about a new mother named Camilla who wakes up one morning to go back to work. Her maternity leave is over, so she has to drop her infant daughter off at daycare. And when she wakes up in the morning, instead of finding her husband in the spot where he's supposed to be, she finds this really cryptic note. And then a little bit later on in the morning, a breaking news story emerges about a hostage situation. And then Camilla gets a call from the police that her husband Luke is actually involved, but not as a victim, as the gunman. Next up is You Are Fatally Invited by Andy Plago. This one is about a renowned anonymous author who hires a woman to host a writing retreat on his property. However, the woman that he hires has a grudge against one of the invited participants. On the guest list are 6 different thriller authors who are all known for their misdirection and their mayhem. And the 2 planning the retreat have created a week's worth of puzzles, games, riddles, jump scares, which actually gives Mila, the woman who planned the retreat, the perfect excuse, the perfect cover-up for a murder. A guest does turn up dead, and it's not Mila's doing. And then a storm rolls in, cutting off their access to the mainland, and people start dying left and right. Brynne Weaver has her 3rd book in the Ruinous Love trilogy coming out in February as well, and that's Scythe and Sparrow. And this book follows Rose, who's a motorcycle circus performer who meets and falls in love with small-town Dr. Fionn after a night of murderous adventure goes haywire. Next up is Cursebound by Sarah Ella Rifi. This is the 2nd book in the enchanting trilogy about 2 elven sisters who become imprisoned in the intoxicating world of the Fae, where danger and love lie in wait. Yurin and her sister Lettel find themselves torn between love and duty as the war between the Fae and Elven kingdoms heats up. Last on my list is Hungerstone by Kat Dunn, which is a Carmilla reimagining. This one is a sapphic romance that follows Lenore, who is 10 years into kind of a stale marriage with Henry, who's a steel magnate. Henry decides he wants to host kind of an extravagant hunting excursion for some of London's elite. So Henry and Lenore have to leave their city home and go to their countryside estate. As they're preparing for the event to kick off, a carriage accident near their home brings Carmilla into Lenore's life. Carmilla is kind of weak and pale during the day, Lenore notices, but at night she really kind of perks up with a vibrancy, and Carmilla quickly consumes Lenore's thoughts. So now Lenore is left stuck trying to decide whether she wants to focus on revitalizing her marriage with Henry or if she wants to let Carmilla consume her life. So it sounds like we've got a lot of good ones coming out in the next few months, and if there's something that is not on the list that you're excited for, I'd love to know. Let me know in the comments down below. If you made it all the way through, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, happy reading, friends.